As recently as 200 years ago, the entire Pacific Northwest was an untouched beauty, covered by vast evergreen forests and crystal clear rivers. At times, these pure waters were filled with Chinook, coho, and sockeye salmon, so plentiful it was once told you could walk across the rivers without touching the water. This annual migration of salmon is crucial to the vast array of wildlife who call this area home. Salmon are a key indicator in our fragile Northwest ecosystem. From the majestic bald eagles to the magnificent orcas, many species depend on their selfless act of spawning as they return to their birthplaces to establish the next generation. Their journey has been long and strenuous, starting deep in the freshwater wilderness, evading countless predators for many months as they make their way to the ocean, where they will spend years feeding and maturing, all in an effort to return to their home stream and start this process over again. With continued development and increased transportation needs throughout the region, we are changing the very core of the landscape we are so accustomed to. Every decision made has an impact on this fragile ecosystem. From adjustments in riparian zones, to changing the water flow through stormwater systems, we have altered this natural water cycle, much to the demise of our local salmon populations. In an untouched environment, the rain and snow slowly make its way to streams and rivers, largely through groundwater recharge and flows controlled by plants and organic materials blanketing the soils. This undamaged system allows water levels to stay relatively consistent throughout the seasons, and shading from vegetation block much of the sun's rays from warming the waters. The minimal variance in water temperature is ideal for these species to survive. But our developed world is taking a toll on this natural perfection. Over the years, we've claimed this land as our own, not fully realizing the impacts we've had on this delicate system. Through development, we've caused variable flows to rivers and streams. Impervious surfaces direct excess volumes of water into streams without delay, at times flooding areas critical to salmon spawning. During the drier months, water levels lower, causing increased temperatures which are detrimental to the survival of salmon fry. These issues have been well documented over the years, visible to anyone enjoying the amazing wilderness if you take the time to look. But new problems are now coming to light. Problems less obvious as we go about our daily routines. Problems which may be causing a greater strain on this delicate ecosystem than anyone ever imagined. Scientists have recently uncovered a crucial flaw in our attempt to design the systems that handle our stormwater. For decades, we have been polluting the source waters with contaminated stormwater from vehicle-impacted roadways and bridges. Unlike oil or sediment, which is easily recognizable, we are continually poisoning these waters with minuscule amounts of pollution from tires and brakes. Every vehicle on the road, every road in the region, each one releasing microscopic bits of chemical-laden rubber and trace metals as their tires and brakes wear out on our roadways. Add in dripping oil, windshield wiper fluid being expelled, and exhaust settling out, and we've created a constant toxic film on our roads. When it rains, these contaminants flow freely into our storm drains and ditches, and often directly into our rivers and streams. Some pollutants are dissolved, others are in solid form, but when combined, they are killing our salmon every mile that's driven. It's disturbing to see just one tire abandoned in a ditch or a stream. But imagine 2 pounds of rubber per tire being released into our environment, all in trace amounts, filtering directly through the gills of the aquatic life in our rivers. We can all agree that this needs to be cleaned up. And you can imagine the health effects if you were to inhale this. Is it different than the salmon and other aquatic life taking in these toxins? Passing them along to the entire food chain, causing issues across all the species that depend on them? The young are starting their journey with developmental issues, while the ones that beat the odds and make it to the ocean return to the same polluted waters and die before they have a chance to spawn. Our influences are making it harder and harder for these amazing creatures to fulfill their instinctual obligation to ensure the success of future generations. This is not only putting a strain on the salmon themselves, but the wide variety of wildlife that depend on them for their own preservation. What if there was an answer? An option to reverse the effects of our destruction, to neutralize the impacts of our development on this amazing world. Scientists researching vehicle-impacted stormwater exposed salmon to runoff off local roadways and witnessed a 100% mortality in less than 24 hours. They then used locally produced and sustainable compost-based filtration media to filter the same water, and miraculously found this process allowed for a 100% survival rate of all the salmon involved in these studies. A complete reversal of this dire issue, a solution to the problem. Something as simple as a compost-based filtration system, biologically and chemically binding and filtering out pollutants, reducing their negative impacts on aquatic life. This process is currently being implemented in many cities in the form of bioretention systems as a way to better control stormwater flows. But with minimal adjustments, it can be implemented along roadways and under bridges to treat the stormwater at its source before it plays a devastating role on our environment. We can't change the past, but we can move forward with more consideration. We have an obligation to the species we share this amazing land with. There are still areas in the Pacific Northwest that are largely unpopulated and undeveloped. Travel to them. Get a glimpse into years past and you'll find inspiration and hope in this journey. The responsibility to reverse the effects of our consumption lies solely on us as humans. And that journey starts now, one step at a time, until we reach our destination.
The Yolo Bypass was a historical floodplain. Today it is a resource for people, habitat for fish and wildlife, and flood protection is the primary purpose of the Yolo Bypass today. It's 59,000 acres. It's a pretty large piece of land. It's 40 miles long, about 3 miles wide on average. It collects probably 80% of the floodwaters and diverts them into the bypass, protecting the city of Sacramento and the surrounding areas. We have a lot of agriculture in the bypass, a lot of rice. We have hunting in the bypass, duck clubs. It is a Pacific flyway hub for waterfowl and the shorebirds. It's a fisheries habitat, so it's pretty important.
The Yolo Bypass is not only a prominent element of the Sacramento area flood control system, it's an important fish migration corridor. The Fremont Weir allows for high flows from the Sacramento River onto the bypass, which occurs in about 1 out of 2 or 3 years. When water spills over the Fremont Weir, adult salmon, steelhead, and sturgeon on their way upstream are often attracted into the Yolo Bypass. When the Sacramento River falls back down below the top of the weir, fish become stranded downstream of this large concrete wall. These fish that have traveled almost 40 miles end up disconnected from the river.
This project focuses on updating the old Daniil fish passage ladder. The problem was when the fish get to the structure, there's inadequate depth for them to pass through the old structure, which was just 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep. So the fish passageway channel now widens that to 15 feet wide and 10 feet deep. The whole system's automated, and once the water levels get high enough to overflow Fremont Weir, the gate is triggered to open and allow fish to return back to the Sacramento River. And that connection improves fish passage and reduces their likely to get stranded in the Yolo Bypass and at Fremont Weir.
From a fish's perspective, when Yolo Bypass floods, the bypass is the river. So a fish coming up the bypass when it's flooding is moving up towards its spawning grounds. But as the river starts to drop and the water drops below the crest of that weir, suddenly that water turns off. And where all the fish would have been attracted up the Yolo Bypass towards Fremont Weir, suddenly they're stuck. And we needed a way to keep enough water moving through that weir to allow the fish back to the river, to attract them to that place and put them back where we want them, instead of having them stray into drainage canals and die. And losing an adult winter run, a fish that's on the brink of extinction, is unbearable. This is a fish that has made it out to the ocean. It's almost back. It's almost there to reproduce, to have 5,000 eggs in the gravel, and we're losing it because it is attracted to ag flow. If a fish or any other native critter can't recognize the river system, the habitat that they're adapted to, then they're not going to do well. So our job is to understand how the valley used to work, what fish expect, and be able to mimic that, to work with nature to allow salmon to recognize the Sacramento River again.
This project is a prime example of what we can do when state and federal partners work with local government and landowners for the benefit of fish and water supply reliability in California. It's a big win to have this project completed, and we've learned a lot through the implementation of the Adult Fish Passage project, and we'll continue to use that knowledge as we move forward on future efforts to address adult fish passage barriers and juvenile floodplain rearing habitat.
The Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation have a large suite of actions that we need to implement in order to help the recovery of these species. The overall mission is to promote recovery so that we are not causing jeopardy of any of these species when we operate the State Water Project or the Central Valley Project. That's the ultimate goal. We have a long way to go still, and within the bypass there are several fisheries issues that we need to address as well, but this is a really good start.
pilgrims, when they first came to Massachusetts, called it the paradise of all these parts because of the amazing fisheries that were here of river herring, cod, all sorts of natural bounty. And I think that Massachusetts can kind of do a lot of good for itself by getting rid of some of these old dams to try and boost the system, because you can reduce fishing quotas, so you can tell a fisherman you should fish less, or you can increase the kind of bait fish that are going into the system through some of these measures. So for me, in a world where you don't have many kind of win-win scenarios, this is a big win-win scenario Massachusetts has.
I wish I saw more fish and more like animals inside, because when they went to go to the fish, there was only one, so it's kind of sad to see, like everyone, there's more people in the world, so the populations are decreasing. So I think that, yeah, I'd like to see more fish definitely and stuff like that.
There was actually a petition to list river herring as an endangered species a few years ago, and so I think we're really at a kind of a tipping point here.
There are a lot of factors that go into determining if a dam would be a good candidate. One of the biggest ones is actually the ownership of the dam, because if you don't have an owner who is a willing participant, that's an obstacle that you have to overcome before you can even do anything. So a willing owner is very important.
My grandfather built a dam on the third herring brook in 1929. It had a series of uses for the community until we reached a point where they no longer served that primary use. And then when we started talking about, taking the dam out, the people on the pond weren't too happy, because they had a place to fish, they had a place to skate, they had something to look at. And that dam, it breached about, 10 years ago. So both of his dams have kind of gone the way of all things.
It was very early in our state, in Massachusetts, for dam removal. In fact, throughout the country, it was still a relatively new type of restoration project. People hadn't really been thinking about taking out dams before, so it wasn't well known to even consider taking out a dam. So this was really right up there in terms of the early thinking about what could we do in our own state about restoring our rivers and dam removal.
You can look at streams, you can dig up the money, you can get good partners, but if you don't build a consensus, if you don't get people behind the idea and the process, then you don't get anywhere, because they'll come out and they'll oppose you because they don't want to lose their pond. So North and South Rivers ran into a little bit of that on Tack Factory, but the fact that that dissipated so quickly was a good sign. And increasingly now, whenever I talk to people, they're very supportive of the idea of dam removal.
While they may feel like they're losing their pond, they're actually gaining something that is going to be beautiful.
Having the free-flowing river or brook is the public good, basically. Having the dam, you have a pond there for your local neighborhood or community, but when you let the river flow, you're letting those benefits flow all downstream to a whole swath of people.
As we reconnect the systems and make them continuous, you're going to have that biomass, those fish coming in further upstream, and you're going to have more diversity of species, but you're also going to increase the availability of nutrients for various species like heron and things like that. And suddenly they can start feeding on those as well, and raccoon and possum, things like that can come to the river. So it really increases the biomass of the system itself.
It's a really an issue about connections. And so it seems like this local issue of there's a pond here and there's a dam here, and it's a very localized issue. But the truth of the matter is that removing that dam connects that whole habitat to the wider community.
It's all linked together. I mean, the river herring that used to come up these streams, Third Herring Brook, I mean, that's how it got its name, was the abundant herring populations. They provide forage for a wide variety of things, from the migratory birds like the osprey to the striped bass that anglers like to catch in the salt water, to many, many other things. It's a big part of the ecosystem of these migratory fish. And so anything we could do to maintain or increase their populations is going to benefit the ecosystem as a whole.
It's that dichotomy between civilized and wild that we all deal with. We all live in nature, but the wild is something, it's nature that's working. What we've tended to do is disrupt the wild. And I think that's where people make the mistake, you know, when they look at a mill pond and they can see nature in the mill pond. But it's not the wild process that would be there if the dam was out.
We have over 2,000 dams here in Massachusetts, and one of the first things that the settlers, the European colonists, when they came here, was to build dams on the stream. So we have almost 400 years of dam building here in Massachusetts. And that doesn't count all the smaller dams like Cranberry Bog Flumes or the little tiny dam at Tiffany Road. Basically, each culvert acts like a dam, but there's 2,000 listed dams in Massachusetts. A large portion of those could probably be removed because they're no longer functioning to provide power or other things. They're basically just decaying. And when they were put in, people really didn't think about the impacts on fish of building these dams.
So this is the pit tag in the plastic bag, and it's the same as in the fish. And we're going to run it through the antenna to see if the antenna is working. You should hear a beep.
If we catch brook trout or any other species that we want to tag, we'll be tagging them with pit tags, and that will enable us to get a unique identification on the fish. Right now there's, or there will be, I believe, 2 antennas set up to monitor the fish movements, and hopefully we'll see some of those wild brook trout from the tributary go down and hit those antennas in the main stem. Because one of the big hopes that I have is some of those wild brook trout that have survived in this tributary is to enable them to get down into the saltwater again, which is what their ancestors were doing naturally.
If you think about those dams as sort of clogs or clots in a circulatory system of the coastal watersheds, by having a negative impact on those smaller tributaries, you're having a negative impact on the larger river and the ocean as well. The entire watershed is crucial to maintaining the idea of an ocean full of fish.
A little bit of attention for long enough, for a decade or two, allows nature to come back. And basically, nature will come back. I think that it takes hope, and sometimes we may fail, but the general pattern has been that if you give nature the opportunity to recolonize an area that had been made impossible for it, nature will come back. And I think our obligation is to just take the areas that we've spoiled and be able to recreate the habitat that enables nature to really flower back again and offer us the things that we value.
Very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that they bring back the numbers of fish and that the rivers are brought back to, higher levels.
There's a lot hanging on this, and it's about more than just me going fishing or my friends going fishing or catching a few trout. It's about the whole interconnected spider web of life that runs down to the ocean.
This story is repeated over and over with every environmental problem we have, whether it's a dam or pollution or any of the things that we're facing. They're people problems. And so you got to start with people and engage them in changing the world.
This world is fragile. Our resources are fragile. And I would say if we value them, do something to improve them.
It just takes somebody that wants to see something done. It's amazing what you can do. Get active, do something. Whatever you do, if it makes you feel better, it'll probably be good for other people too.
Our vision for the future for the third herring brook is that we will have all 3 of those dams removed, and then we'll have a great fish ladder up at Jacob's Pond, and we'll be able to have our volunteers document herring coming up into Jacob's Pond. And because those herring are able to access Jacob's Pond for spawning, the population will increase, and we'll have a place where people can come and see thousands and thousands of herring migrating where nothing is happening right now.
I've had the fortune, good or bad, to have lived in the same place for all of my life. In that time, the pond near my home has been enduring all of its seasons of ice and floods and droughts, as I have endured all of my seasons of walking, skiing, paddling, through my joy and grief. Blind was each year with its high singing of tiny hyla after the thaw, the sun-struck greening of fields as trees flowered, the belching of summer bullfrogs, the hungry buzz of deer flies, the shortening of the days, the final and mad orange tinting of the maples before the fall, the spirals of snow caught in wind devils racing across the ice, all passing and then returning unchanging within the cycle. Yet by this emergence, as if the farmer building the wall was blind to the wall's line of travel, the stone walls tell that there was a time before the pond, before we boys swung from rope swings strung from the tree on the old dam. Sometimes I think of that time, before the trees were cleared and the rocks were piled and lined into walls, when there was a stream of peat-stained water chortling over gravel, flowing through sun and shadow. One day soon the dam will break, and a change will come, and what I've always known will be no more, and what I've not known will be again.